I'm saying that ISIS came about because Halliburton left people with guns and no jobs. And we kill off the leaders, and there's nobody left to negotiate with or to work with on positive plans. So one thing, I don't think that violence is a solution to anything, and that the best solution, and what we've done here was we've generated jobs, and we did it largely around our airport. When I came to Atlanta, the airport was a Quonset hut with one runway. And now last year it earned $34 billion and created over 400,000 jobs. And it didn't cost the taxpayers any money. It didn't cost the taxpayers any money because we used private funds. We went to Wall Street and we developed what I call public purpose capitalism. That we define the public purpose, and then we go to the private markets to get it financed. And all of the people that are going to use the facility, back then it was Delta, Eastern, American, all the airlines had to be on the debt. And before they could make any money, they had to pay the debt service. So that airport, we've probably spent close to $20 billion on it over 30 years. But it generates $25, $30 billion a year. It has generated as much as $50 billion in a year. And it has, it runs around 400,000 jobs that are directly affected by that airport. Plus the fact that we started bringing in business from other countries. When we got Lufthansa to fly in here, they were very reluctant. And I said, but if Germany's economy and Germany's population is flat, if you're going to be in business in the 21st century, you got to be in the U.S. marketplace. So you need to be in Atlanta. We now have 1,500 German businesses that are located around the city. Now, they're not hiring Germans. They didn't bring Germans with them, a few. But for the most part, our economy is a global economy. It's an international economy. Because we brought the Japan Airlines in, we brought people in from Swiss Air, KLM. The Dutch were one of the biggest investors in Atlanta. And when people will invest their money with you when their money is safe, when you're honest, and when you're efficient. And the way I assured that everybody would be honest was every major investor, I gave them my direct line. And if they had any kind of problem and they thought somebody was trying to shake them down or not going fast enough, they could call me personally. And I said that, and I assigned one person to work with each investor, with each developer, so that we didn't have to go through a whole bureaucracy. I don't know whether you realize it or not, but bureaucracy was an invention of colonialism to keep people from making decisions for themselves. It slowed down the process so that the people who had to go back to England or back to France or back to Portugal, nothing would happen while they were gone. And so they created all these titles and all these levels of decision making, gave people, bureaucracy is the highest organized system of slavery that the planet has produced. And you all get in it and be proud to be secretary of this, executive director. All these titles are so much bull. I mean, the bigger your title, the less you control. And so we flattened all that out. And we didn't, you know, we didn't have titles and we didn't have hierarchy. We created a competitive environment. And if you couldn't keep up, you left. But most people found a way to keep up. But I was talking too much. I'm supposed to be answering your questions, so.
President, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate having you here. I'm Tabo Malo from Johannesburg, South Africa. My question really relates to something that's been bugging me for the last couple of weeks we've been here, and obviously the last couple of months as well. The amount of brutality we've seen police on TV with particularly young black youth. We've seen this week another case in New York. We saw Sandra Bland last week or the week before. And of course we know the issue of the need to reform.
That's nonsense.
But
let me just say, we've been killing people for how long? We killed Indians by the millions. So, I mean, this is a violent society, as is your society. See? And your policemen are just as rough. In fact, I got beat up by a bunch of white policemen in '64. My son got beat up by a bunch of black policemen when he was in college, on the college campus. There's something about a police mentality that, if not well trained and well paid, will become oppressive. And it doesn't matter what color they are, that's not race, that's economics. See? And the way we dealt with it here was, first of all, we made sure that our police force looked like the citizens. It was roughly half and half, black and white, but maybe most important, it was 30% female. Because we found that female officers were, you know, were much more interested in preventing crime, and they would think things through. The men had been trained, you know, to wait till something was done and then chase them down and, you know, and be macho. That's not good law enforcement. And we raised our police salaries the 8 years I was mayor. We gave them a 75% raise over the 8 years because we wanted them well paid. We also arranged for them to come back to school here at Clark, Georgia State, to get correspondence courses, and they got more money the better they were trained. We gave them specific assignments. There was a young man in my office who was supposed to be protecting me. I said, look, I don't need any protection. Lord will protect me. What I need you to do is sit down here, and you're taking this degree in computer science, and I want you to track all the crime for the last 3 years and see where we might have crime in the next 3 years. And instead of following me around pretending you're a bodyguard, you know, sit here and do some work. And that'll be more valuable than keeping me. I mean, if I can't stay alive, I didn't have any bodyguards during the whole civil rights movement. So why should I need bodyguards to be mayor? And so we put our people to work on specific projects, and we developed a highly trained intelligence police force that was black and white, male and female. When we had Hispanics moving in, we made sure we went out and recruited and trained some young Hispanics. I mean, you have to reflect the population, and that has been our goal up to now. But now, that you're still going to have crazy cops.
I guess my question was...
Look, the policemen are scared. They are scared. They don't know what they're running into. See, and it's happened right out here on Highway 75. That's a drug dealer corridor. And we've had a policeman stop a guy for speeding, and he walks up there and he shoots him. And we've had a couple of those kind of things happen. So it's a very dangerous world, but it's not racial. It's the combination of, one, economics and lack of training. because most of these little country towns will take a kid out of high school who was a good football player. They'll get a veteran who comes back and give him a uniform, a stick, and a gun, and then he's got to deal with the complicated problems of a 21st century society. And I would say the biggest crime problem we have is not 1 or 2 people getting killed, but we're probably the female trafficking capital of the Southeast through our airport. You know, and I'm much more concerned. I mean, remember, I grew up in the South, and I grew up 50 yards from the headquarters of the Nazi Party. And my daddy at 4 years old told me, look, white supremacy is a sickness. You don't get mad with sick people. You don't get upset with sick people, and you don't let them get you upset, because it's contagious, see? You have to think. And he used to say all the time, don't get mad, get smart, see? And you can run, you can fight, or you can use your mind and think your way out. Said you're not going to be that big, so you're not going to be able to beat many people. You can run pretty good, but you won't feel good about running from problems. Stand up, use your mind, and face them. And that was what I heard from 4 years old on. And nowadays, unfortunately, people think they're free, but they think freedom doesn't have any responsibility attached to it. The success or failure of urban life and rural life is really respect, global life. Jimmy Carter didn't kill anybody in the 4 years he was president. And you know why? He respected everybody. He didn't have to kill them. When he sent me to Africa, he wrote a little note. He said, I want you to go to Africa as ask as many African leaders as you can what they would like us, what they expect of us. And what they told me was not to bother with South Africa. Julius Nyerere said, we need you to help us with Zimbabwe and Namibia. And if we're working with Zimbabwe and Namibia and we can get them independent, then that will involve us having to deal with the South Africans. And they may learn not to be afraid of us, which is exactly what happened. And then it'll be easier for us when it comes time to get, and as he said it, Nelson and the boys out of jail. We will have established a relationship. But if the United States comes in right now trying to, you know, force South Africa to do something, you're going to create more trouble than you want. And it won't do us nearly as much good as patient, respectful relationships with each other. And so we listened, and it worked. And same thing with the Israelis didn't want to go to war with Egypt anymore. They knew they were lucky. And Egypt didn't want to be tackling with Israel. But they didn't know how to have a peace. And so President Carter just invited them all here. And they stayed about a week or 10 days, but they never met with each other. One stayed in one cabin and one stayed in another cabin, and they walked back and forth till they found an agreement. And everybody said, this Jimmy Carter is naive, this isn't worth the paper it's written on. But for 45 years, no Israeli has killed any Egyptian, and no Egyptian has killed any Israeli. So I call it the politics of respect. And you have to learn to respect your adversaries and show them respect and try to understand where they're coming from.
Thank you very much, sir. My name is Napoleon. I'm from Zimbabwe. My question has to do with U.S.-Africa relations. The U.S. has often used strategies of withholding financial support or maybe economic sanctions on African countries to pressure them to submit to or abide to certain standards. Now, some of these countries, for example, Zimbabwe, out of necessity, embarked on a look-east policy. And now it's abundantly clear that the Chinese have overtaken the US when it comes to Africa-US, when it comes to Africa trade.
Not really, but that's okay.
They overtook them in 2009, actually, which is a while ago. So,
well, here's what, okay, Rachel.
My question is, what is the US doing to re-engage Africa when it comes to trade?
The US isn't doing anything. Unfortunately, right now the US is so confused about its own situations. It has not got a focus on Africa. Where the focus on Africa is coming from is the private sector and the nonprofit sector. And I think what you'll find is that the Chinese are doing infrastructure development, and they're gaining they're signing up minerals, but they're not training Africans. And they're not leaving any social or political infrastructure. In fact, they stay out of that. So it doesn't hurt for, I mean, the Chinese have been in Africa since the 50s. And I went to a huge stadium in the Sudan in the early 70s. And Chinese built that, but you know, it's a wonderful thing. They took some Sudanese children back to China, and it was a wonderful thing to see these young African children doing these Chinese dances and singing and acrobats and things, you know. And so Africa is so big and has so many problems and so many opportunities that nobody is ever going to control Africa. And you're a president whom I like and disagree with all the time, but we disagreed with man to man. I said, you know, they say you're a communist, but you're not a communist. I said, you're one of these Jesuit fundamentalists. So he grew up in the Catholic Church, and I said, whenever you Catholics get to be president, you always think you the Pope. And I said, it's not just true here, it's true in Nicaragua. Almost everywhere you had a Catholic president, he has an authoritarian view. And I said, you just don't understand democracy. Now, I can talk to him like that. But the last time I was in Zimbabwe and I walked into the press conference, and as soon as I walked in the door, he's standing up there, he said, Andy, you've gotten fat. And I said, well, yeah, I don't have the time to work out, and I don't have all these people looking out for me that you do. But he's 90?
91.
91. And he works out every day. He's still the same weight. He and President Carter are the only two people I know that are 90 and still weigh the same thing they weighed when they graduated from college. You know, and so, but he's a genius. Now, he's often wrong, and he doesn't like anybody to challenge him. But he's smarter than any of the people who've tried to take him on. And he always sees anybody that is coming after him a pawn for the white South Africans. And for the most part, that's been true. I mean, there have been a number of attempts to overthrow him that have come out of various kind of mercenary groups. And I wish, see, I think President Nyerere did it right. President Nyerere not only stepped down, but 40 years ago maybe, but President Kikwete, who is now the president about to step down, was picked by Nyerere when he was a youth. And he had almost picked and trained the last 5 presidents to succeed him. And he made sure that the country was balanced and represented, and Tanzania has done really miraculously with little or no resources and almost no foreign aid or help. Zimbabwe, though, is just so rich. And when he agreed to let the whites have 20% of the votes in the parliament, and he agreed to a constitution for 10 years, and the United States and Britain were supposed to develop a land reform plan, which they did not do. At the end of 10 years, when he wanted to implement the land reform, it was Kaunda and Nyerere and Obasanjo and others said to start the land reform issue right now would interfere with South Africa. And so they backed off for another 10 years. Then in 2000, Mandela got out of jail and became president in '94. And Thabo Mbeki was president, and the soldiers came back to him and said, but what about our land? So he said, well, they took it from us, let's just take it back. Well, there was no fight over land. There's so much land in Zimbabwe that, that there's enough land for everybody. But it's not the land, it's the minerals in the land. And Harry Oppenheimer had more land in Zimbabwe than there's no landowner. He had more land bigger than within Zimbabwe that was bigger than the state of Rhode Island. And Mugabe said, you have 478,000 hectares. We need to take 200,000 hectares. They still got 278,000 hectares is over 1 million acres. There's no landowner in America that has 1 million acres of land in one place. So, and with all of the fuss they made about land reform, there were only about 200 people that died and only 12 whites. Now, there are more than 12 whites in land reform fights in South Africa every month, because the land issue is a lasting issue in many places. In Zimbabwe, people who are my age can remember being born at a certain place and they want their family land back. I went to down in Cape Town, and there was a Malaysian woman who was taking me to the airport, and I said, my wife and I got married up here in Bishop's Court. And she said, I grew up there. And I, being stupid, I said, don't tell me your family worked for those white folks, rich white folks up there. She said, hell no. My father built that house, and he was shipping, he had a shipping company to Malaysia, and they took that house from us when I was about 12 years old. And I said, well, have you gone to the new government to try to get it back? She said, my mother goes every month. But the South African government would have the hardest time dealing with land reform. And so that's been the issue that has held back Zimbabwe. But Zimbabwe, I don't know, it's a very resourceful country, very intelligent people, and they're gonna make it all right.
That's it. Can I suggest something, Ambassador? How about maybe 2, 3 questions, and then we'll go to the, you're not hungry, right? We'll eat lunch, and then Ambassador.
Everybody here is too fat.
You will be still there during lunch, so some of you do not have chance to ask him. You still will have.
We'll ask him lunch. We're good. The lady was.
Thank you for visiting with us. We're glad to have you. I'm Tanya from Kenya, and my question is about the women agenda. So I've noticed that even when we are in this protected environment where we are fellows and we are leaders and aspiring leaders, when we talk about the women agenda, it has almost started to sound like rhetoric because we haven't stopped talking about it for the last couple of decades. And it gets to the point where we almost start to see people's eyes start glazing over. So my question is in two parts. Is the women agenda still relevant? And secondly, how do we start to have these conversations in a way that inspires both men and women to actually want to participate, as opposed to listening to it like it's rhetoric and like it's something that we don't need to continue paying attention to?
Well, not only is it relevant, it is the most relevant issue on the planet. That the planet cannot survive using only 50% of its resources. The fastest growing economy in Africa right now, I think, is Rwanda. Rwanda's government is 64% female. And they make things work. Bill Gates was addressing Saudi Arabia, and he talked about all of the technical and economic changes and educational opportunities and that were needed to survive in the 21st century. And somebody asked him, well, do you think Saudi Arabia can become a global leader in the next few decades? And he was speaking to a room where there was a wall in the middle, and the men were on one side and the women were on the other side. He said, yes, you could, if you take down that wall and use all your resources. So, but if you're not using, I mean, I would say that when I was mayor, over half of the commissioners who ran things were women. The same thing was true of the judges that I appointed. And you have to make a conscious effort. Let me just tell this one story. When Ray Charles came here, it was our 150th anniversary. And we had a concert in the park, and we thought about 25 or 30,000 people would show up. Almost 100,000 people showed up. And they were all around the stage. And Ray Charles said, I'm blind, but I can see that too many people too close to the stage. And I'm not going to get on the stage. I've been on a stage that got pushed down before. He said, you got to get these people moved back. Well, we didn't expect that many people, so we only had about a dozen policemen. And the first thing the men did was grab arms and start marching toward the crowd. And unfortunately, there was a little lady sergeant who said, just a minute, fellas, let me take care of this. And she got up there and she said, I'm Sergeant Susie so-and-so, and I want you to play a game with me. How many of you remember playing Simon Says? And everybody said, yeah. I said, well, tonight we're going to play Susie Says. And when I blow the whistle, I want everybody in the front row to turn around, see, and face south, the airport. And I want you, when I blow the whistle again, I want you to politely ask the people behind you to turn around. And, you know, she did that about 10 times, and everybody turned around. When everybody was facing south, she said, now, only the people in the back few rows. When I blow the whistle again, I want everybody in the back rows to take 10, 12 giant steps. And then when they got settled, she moved that whole crowd with brains and a whistle. If the men had started pushing and shoving, we'd have had a riot, and that would have been the end of it. So you got to use female brain power. I mean, after all, women run families, men think they do. And, you know, you just have to be careful of these male egos. You can't let them know you're running it like you do at home. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Chonam from Ghana. And over the past 6 weeks, we've been having very interesting conversations about the challenges in Africa and so on. And so there emerged an interesting debate about the cause of our challenge. Some of the view that is the people and the culture of the people. And the other school of thought is about leadership. As a statesman and a senior member of our society, what exactly do you think is really the cause of our challenges in Africa? The second question is, before you answer, is I want to find out what's your greatest regret as a politician. Thank you.
The problems in Africa are they're human beings. and you have to remember that it took Europe 500 years to adjust to the printing press. My wife doesn't like me to say that, but the printing press was invented in 1490. By 1500, they started translating the Bible into different languages. When they translated the Bible from Latin to German, you had a 100-year war in Germany. Then in 1611, they translated the Bible into English. And the Presbyterians didn't like the way the Anglicans read it, and the Congregationalists and the Methodists and the Baptists didn't like anybody. And they all got mad and they all came to the United States. The United States was formed because of the printing press and the way people interpreted the Bible. Society is always changing. It took 2 world wars to get the world back together after the invention of the printing press. Now why would anybody expect us not to have problems when that thing you call in there, that phone, if you had the money, you could wire money right there without even disturbing. I mean, we live in a global economy, and we don't have a global mentality. People are still thinking about their village and their nation. Money doesn't know boundaries. The reason we were successful, I said, there's no money in Washington. Why waste my time going to talk to the president or the secretary of treasury? There's no money at the state capitol. Where's the money? The money was in the Middle East. The money was in Germany. The money was in Japan. So we went where the money was, and we brought the money here. And we treated them right. We didn't cheat them. We made sure that their investments were safe. They made money. In fact, that's why we grew so fast. My biggest regret. I almost don't have any regrets. I did the best I could. And I don't know that I would have changed much. I mean, I just, and I'm far from perfect, and there are a lot of, I still have a lot of things I want to do. I figured the president said that he was the Joshua generation and we were the Moses generation from the 60s and civil rights movement. And I realized that Moses was 80 when he started leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. And so I'm 83, so I figure I got some time. I'm not through yet, and there's a lot to be done. But you didn't have a, you asked the first one, didn't you?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Ibrahim Balami. I'm from Nigeria, Borno State, Maiduguri. Yes. And my question is something you said very, very interesting about how you were able to get people to invest in the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. You talked about integrity, efficiency, and honesty. All of us here are young African leaders and businessmen and women. How do we cultivate this efficiency attitude, this integrity attitude, this honesty attitude? Because I believe this is one of the things that we would need when we take back home to put into practice to develop and grow our businesses.
Well, you have to lead by example. And I didn't hesitate to criticize anybody that I wanted to criticize. I wasn't polite or respectful when it came time to dishonesty. I called a spade, as we said. But one thing I didn't do was I didn't touch any money. There's nobody in my family that works at the airport. See, when I brought the Olympics here, I worked as a volunteer. We brought $2.5 billion into the city, and almost everybody made money on the Olympics but me and my family. See, and you I mean, I don't consider myself poor. See, I consider myself blessed because I've never really wanted anything or needed anything, but everybody thinks I'm rich because I'm so blessed I act rich because there's nothing that nothing I want that I can't get or that I don't enjoy, and I did not define my success by either my degrees or my titles, though I've had a lot of titles. I've always pretty much gone by my first name, Andy. And some people called me ambassador, some people called me mayor, some people called me congressman, but it didn't matter. I was still the same person that I was when I worked with Martin Luther King. But more important, the same person I was when I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, in a really racist, segregated environment. That's, yeah. Nigeria, let me just say, Nigeria has a reputation for being corrupt. and there are books written about it. See, and I think you ought to read those books and understand it. But the first generation of wealthy people in America were called robber barons, and they were the Mellons, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, all of these big names that we worship and idolize now. But they got their money questionably in the beginning. And so people label them robber barons, but they continued to serve the community, they continued to expand the economy, and eventually we learned to appreciate them. Now the thing that amazes me in Nigeria is that as bad as Nigeria is in the public, I don't see that way when I'm there. And I see many successful families and businesses. And when I went to Howard University in the 40s, the smartest people in my class were Nigerians. They had better education than I had. And I remember my guy who lived on the hall with me was, well, he used to say, you're a smart young man. You amount to something if you ever get civilized. And I said, what do you mean civilized? He said, a civilized man should be able to walk a mile and recite poetry and never repeat himself. I said, well, if I could cite all the blues and all the Bible and all the hymns, I might be able to make it a few blocks, but I probably won't ever be civilized by your Nigerian definition. But now he was a Superman. He went back to Nigeria, he finished Howard in 3 years, summa cum laude, went to McGill, became a neurosurgeon, went back to Nigeria, helped form the health service. He did 5 or 6 neurosurgeries a day, and he was the dean of the medical school at Ibadan. But he died before he was 60. But he literally worked 20 hours a day when he was in school. And so there's a tremendous amount of talent in Nigeria. And look at India. India is doing well in spite of the fact that they're 1.5 billion people. And their Muslims in India are some of the richest Muslims anywhere in the world. And the society is dominated by Hindus. You know, life is a struggle. And you just don't ever give up, and you don't ever stop dreaming, and you don't ever stop believing. We used to say, if you can conceive it and believe it, you can achieve it. See? And so people thought I was crazy when I started. I mean, they literally told me, when I said I was going to be mayor, they said, well, what can you do that nobody else can do? I said, well, I can try to make this an international city. And one of the leading bankers said, where in the hell did you get that nut from? And that was the idea of response to my saying, I thought I could make Atlanta an international city. But look at it, see? And one of the first times I went overseas, I asked him to go with me. And what I realized was he had the money and he had the power and he was white, but I had more experience around the world and had more knowledge, and because I didn't read about I didn't learn about the world in books. I learned about it from my classmates. And that's why you all ought to take advantage of this situation. And you ought to stay in touch with each other. Because every friendship here could one day be a political or business network. We had 40 leaders from Indonesia here down at Georgia State about 20 years ago. Yeah. And they represented every section of Indonesia. And they were the only people in Indonesia that knew somebody in every state, because every state was represented. When the tsunami hit, they were a team, because they'd become a team here, and they knew how to get in touch with each other, they knew how to trust each other, and they literally saved that country. 40 people in a society of, what is it, 300 million? But 40 people who knew each other and trusted each other. And the lady who was one of the ladies who ended up being the leader of the group ended up being the Minister of Finance because of the connection she made on the visit to Atlanta.
So could we just take one more question?
Yeah. Okay, so my name is Nicholas Gauss, I'm from Zambia. So I just want to bring back my question on the aspect of leadership. I think one thing that we tend to see in Africa, which has really caused the most part of the problems, well, you mentioned too earlier on, and also what we are all able to relate with, has mostly been around the sort of leadership that we have. It's either been weak or been the wrong leadership, or just don't have the right institutions supporting this sort of leadership system. Now, in view of the experience that you have had working on the continent, what would you say is the style of leadership that Africa needs in the next, maybe say 10 years to come? And the second question I have is, as young African leaders, as we go back next week to our various countries, what would you recommend to be the collective thought that all of us must have on leadership? And what specific attributes must we all be working on for us to be able to better change Africa for better? Let
me quote Gandhi. Gandhi said, "There go my people. I must catch them, for I am their leader." And the people who have the title of leaders, they're not leading anything or anybody. They're really not. They're not even leading their own lives. They hold up, for the most part, being important, cutting ribbons. We learned that. We did not. The civil rights movement didn't go to the president, didn't go to the students here organized themselves, and they decided on the strategy. And it was a nonviolent strategy that they were able to articulate, put in writing, and communicate. And a leader is anybody who can build a consensus around an idea. And again, I said, if you can conceive of it, a good idea that will help a lot of people, and you can build a consensus around it, you are the leader. You don't need the title, and you certainly don't need the salary. The salary is the string. Because if you once, I mean, how much is your soul worth? So, I mean, being an independent, free-thinking human being makes you automatically a leader. Look at the story of Joseph in the Bible. Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery. He got out of slavery and worked in the kitchen, and then the cook, his wife got him put him back in jail, and I mean, it wasn't easy, but he ended up saving the country from famine. And so you have to be prepared to, one, work with other people. And I always found that it was best to lead from behind. You don't see a lot of pictures of me in the civil rights movement. You know, you had to look for them, because I was never on the front row. I wasn't trying to be in the picture. I was trying to make sure that things happened in the back. And Martin Luther King would never let me go to jail, because he said, no, you have to stay out here. I said, it's more dangerous out here than it is in jail. He said, yeah, that's why you have to stay out here. And so I didn't go to jail very much. But whatever had to be done, the leader is the one who does the best job at whatever has to be done at that time. And the less titles you have, the less responsibility you have. The smaller organization you have. I don't like organizations. I like movements. Movements are volatile. They change. People, I don't care what it is, a fraternity, sorority, they start fussing about who's going to be the president, and it doesn't matter a damn. But somebody who doesn't want to be anything and just doesn't mind doing whatever nobody else wants to do, that was what I set out to do. If there was something that nobody else wanted to do and needed to be done, then I ended up doing it. And if I did it successfully, that ended up making me a leader until I found something else to do, and then I was another crazy radical trying to do something else, you know, but I've had a good life, and I wouldn't change much of it.
Andy, you know the quote that you always use is that it doesn't matter who gets the credit. If you don't worry about who gets the credit,
that's right.
There's no limit to what you can accomplish.
Yeah.
And he says that all the time.
There's no limit to what you can accomplish if you don't mind who gets the credit. Now, in the civil rights movement, that made big sense to me, because the one who was getting the credit was the one who was getting shot at. And so I wasn't anxious for credit. You know, and I wasn't anxious to be the leader. Somebody says everybody has 15 minutes of fame. And usually people who get their 15 minutes of fame are burned out in 20 minutes. And whereas if you have a life that's committed to serve, regardless, and you have to believe that this earth is no accident. Something and somebody put it together, and there is purpose attached to it. And you were put here for some purpose. And it wasn't to be at the top. Jesus said, he who would be the greatest among you, let him be the servant of all. And so in almost any movement, the people who are willing to serve and do the dirty work and not worry about the credit, they'll end up, they'll end up getting more than they do. Maybe we can eat now?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, and it's important for me to say welcome, and also obviously it's goodbye. It's unfortunate, but I also want to thank Ambassador Young for his sharing of his wisdom. As he was talking about Robert Mugabe having a photographic mind, but he also has one steel trap mind. We met way back in 1979. He was the graduation speaker at Stanford University, and he recalled that when we got together in April for dinner, and so you have to give him credit. He's not only a Renaissance man, but his mind is as sharp as a tack, and I truly appreciate that that he has continued to serve. That's one of the things that I would tell you that is really important about the ambassador is that it's not just Renaissance, because he was not doing it, as he pointed out. He was not doing these things out of some power trip. He was doing it because it's a calling, and he's called to be with people. I came to his first inauguration, and I remember in City Hall, even after the inauguration, he went up to his office, and he thrived on making a difference in the lives of people. And so I am hopeful that you recognize that this has truly been a treasure to have a chance to spend time with him and hear his voice. It's an important voice. It's a voice that resounds through history, and I just want to say thank you. Now, I know I'm going to be speaking to you tonight, and so I will be very brief now. I have had the wonderful opportunity to spend time in a number of countries in Africa, really loosely connected. I am an honorary white from South Africa in 1982, Botswana. I was in Kenya right after the attempted coup against Moi, and then in the Sudan on a special mission to end the fighting in the Sudan in 1992. It took 20 years for the fighting to end, and it started up again. And so I've spent a bit of time in Africa on special assignments. I used to work for the International Monetary Fund, and then when I left the International Monetary Fund, they had asked me to come to do the special assignment in the Sudan. And so I can't claim to be an expert on the entirety of the continent, but I've actually spent a good deal of time dealing with some of the challenges that are found in that part of the world. Africa represents a key aspect of the future of this world. Africa is a place that has a serious shortfall of people like you. People who are capable, able, and visionary. In order for the continent and the countries in Africa to really be successful in this century, this is a century that Africa has available to it to really thrive, people like you have to go back, gather information, gather ideas, and then go back and make a difference. And so I leave you with this, that I'm really proud to see such a broad cross-section of individuals. I sat and I listened to the questions, and I said, all of you should be reporters because of the kinds of questions that you asked. And I look forward to seeing you later on this evening. And again, welcome, as well as goodbye.
Mr. President, what does it mean to have such an inspirational group come to Clark Atlanta University and young leaders from Africa?
Well, what it shows is that Clark Atlanta University is really a global institution. We are, a welcoming institution, but we're global. And you can see the countries that are represented in that room range from the southern tip of Africa all the way up to all the way up the east side and back to the west side, including Nigeria and other smaller countries. And so it's a wonderful opportunity for us to show the world that we are looking outward, that we have a perspective that goes beyond the immediate community that we're in. We live in our community, but we also live in the world.
And to have Ambassador Young here, what does that also mean to have such a prominent speaker come?
Well, I've always been impressed by Ambassador Young. My first meeting with him was in 1979, and I am always in debt because in 1979, when I met with him, he met with my mother. My mother was enthralled. She almost passed out, and he spent the whole time after he was a graduation speaker at Stanford. He spent most of the evening after sitting there talking to my mother. And so, you know, we have a kinship, and he remembers that time, and I remember him well.
All right, thank you, Mr. President.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, let me just grab that microphone.
All right, thank you.
Just grab the mic.